Okay, Psych of Human Relations, Chapter 12, Team Building, a Leadership Strategy. The things we're going to be focusing on is the importance of teamwork, identify and describe common types of work teams that you may experience, the behavioral science principles that support team building, what are the attributes of a high-performing team as well as a low-performing team, and then what are some team member skills that we should kind of develop and form and create and learn over the course of not just this class, but our interactions with others. So with this introduction, they're talking about the difference between leadership and management. So leadership is kind of how we inspire others to act, moving to the forefront, taking charge. Whereas management is more the process of how do you organize things and get things moving in the right direction. So the one deals more with how we're interacting with people, and the other has to do a little bit more with how we're structuring things to make sure everything gets done. And so here's another graphic that kind of explains the difference between what management is and what leadership is. When we look at what are some of the challenges in changing a workplace, one of the things is, again, more and more we're seeing the need to work and be part of a team. And again, we're going to talk about the different ways that is going to take place. But when you have high functioning teams, then that's going to lead to more productivity and high profitability. So all of these things are going to work in hand. The other thing this talks about is synergy, which is kind of a term that they use in terms of teamwork, that a group of people, the concept that kind of two heads are better than one, that if you put your efforts together, you can create more than you can individually. So what are some of the characteristics that influence team dynamics? One of the things is this is something that is going to take place all across maybe an organization and in different times at different levels. But the other thing about all of this is not easy. I mean, whenever you work with other kinds of people in any kind of situation, it takes some time, some effort, some commitment, and also being able to understand how everything works, and the fact that you have to kind of rely on trust on other people. And if you don't have that there, team dynamics aren't going to be great. So even if you think about some of the school groups that you've been in, and when you've had people who haven't done their part or not sure what they do, or you can't really trust someone to get things accomplished, you know what it's like to be in one of those groups. So core values is one of the important things to have as a team, because if you kind of highlight those core values and you discuss those core values and you have buy-in in those core values, you're going to get people who are more likely to contribute and do their part and be part of this high-functioning team. So they're going to talk about some of the different types of teams. In this particular case, we're not looking at problem solving. We're going to focus on self-management, cross-functional, and virtual, which are kind of three of the main ones that you're probably going to be a part of in your not just school experience, but maybe work experience. So self-managed teams, these are also known as high-performance teams. They are going to take over something that is done maybe at work on a regular basis. These are going to be kind of smaller or bigger groups depending on what they're going to do. And really, these self-managed teams have very specific functions. And so they have clear goals and things that it is that they're supposed to accomplish. The other type is these cross-functional. This is where maybe you're going to have someone from the engineering department, someone from the marketing department, someone from the sales department, someone from something else, and they're going to send one of those people from each of those different groups, and you are going to take all of your expertise from your specialty and then come together. And a lot of times these are designed when you're creating something new and something different, because you need to have someone from each step of the process be there to be able to say, well, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work for us in this particular space. How can we make sure that that happens? Virtual teams are happening more and more. So these are when you are communicating over the internet through Skype, whatever. And so because of technology, you no longer have to be in the same place at the same time. Now, they have some real clear advantages, including the fact that you have speed, real-time collaboration. It can happen anytime, anywhere, wherever in the world. But there's also some real problems with virtual teams. And so here's a list of how to effectively manage a virtual team. And again, if you're working in a group that's a virtual school group, here are some things to really kind of keep in mind as you are going in there, because it gets real easy when you're in this virtual world to kind of have people who are maybe not necessarily buying into it or doing what they're supposed to do or buying into the goal, and they can hide behind the computer. So you really have to be clear on what it is that people need to do and get accomplished. If we look at the behavioral science principles supporting team building, they're really looking at one of two real approaches to studying this. Either they take successful leaders and they follow them around and ask them questions and dig deep into their background to try and figure out what makes a good leader, or they look at all of the leading scholarship on people who have already researched these successful leaders and take all of that research and identify key characteristics of successful leaders. Some of the thought leaders when it comes to these types of things, one is Douglas McGregor, and he really believes that for most of the working world, employees and workers have kind of been oftentimes overlooked, and that managers have failed to recognize how committed workers can be when there's fulfillment and when there's buy-in. So when he looks at some of the traits of strong teams, these are the things that he has kind of picked out that strong leaders bring to these teams. When you look at Warren Bennis, he believed that what was going to happen is that the workplace was really going to be dominated by employees, and that really leadership was going to be from the bottom up. That employees were the ones who were going to start making the changes and start making suggestions and start making the innovations, and that they were going to impact the leaders. Peter Drucker believed that the best way to predict the future is to create the future. So in other words, the leaders are the visionaries who are one step ahead of everybody else. And so they have to really be in tune to what is happening, not just with their employees, but also with the world around them, so that they can always be one step ahead. And so the real thing when you get to that, leaders should make decisions based on long-term future of the company, not short-term gain. That is really something that is really difficult to do, because so often we're consumed with what we need to do right now just to get to the end of the day. And so that causes us to maybe take some shortcuts that we normally wouldn't take. You always want to kind of keep that long-term goal in mind, and that's what you're working towards. And that allows you to deal with short-term frustrations and short-term setbacks, because in the short term, those are just hurdles to get you to the long term. So when we look at behavioral science, again, the Ohio State model is looking at two different dimensions of leadership. Consideration deals with managers and how they are interacting in the relationships that they build with their employees, whereas the structure is where the manager is looking at how are we going to get workers to accomplish the goals that we set for them. And so those are the things that the Ohio model is looking at. So here's the four different quadrants when you look at structure and consideration, high and low, and what leaders need to do in each of those different quadrants, or what their kind of job description is. When we look at consideration skills, leaders need to be empathetic. They need to be able to put themselves in the shoes of their employees, because if they can do that, if they can get the mindset of what their employees are going through and thinking and feeling, that's going to help. When we look at practices that can improve consideration, the big thing is you really, again, whatever you can do to recognize employees and let them know that you see what they are doing, and let them know that you recognize and appreciate their efforts, and that you go to the trouble of building relationships with them so that you know about their kids, their interests, their strengths, their weaknesses. And when employees feel like you are invested in them, they are going to trust you, and they're going to be more open with you, and they're going to come to you and help you build your company. When you look at structure skills, this is the ability to direct and get things moving in the direction that you need to get them in. So being very clear about what you're expecting out of employees, giving very clear feedback on how things are going and whether you are moving towards what it is that you want to accomplish. You need to deal with things and problems and setbacks and hurdles immediately. Don't let those things fester. Um, Recognize that people are going to make mistakes, and that mistakes are okay, and that that's the learning experience so that we can correct and make sure that we're going in the direction that we want to go. So then the book is going to talk about coaching for peak performance. And here are some areas where coaching can be applied. And really, this is very specific to each employee because they're going to be at different levels. And you really want to create this coaching culture that takes place so that every single person within your organization can recognize when they need to step in and coach someone and help them either develop maybe something of their weakness, or how they can help kind of nudge them along in their career path, and so that they can recognize where employees are and where employees are going, and help them develop and attain those skills that are going to get them in those places. How can you coach performance improvement? Here are some suggestions. Again, you want data to be able to back up what it is that you're saying, and that's where the documentation piece comes in. Help employees recognize their strengths and their weaknesses and what they need to do to continue to move and improve and contribute to the organization. Let employees also suggest ways to improve performance, because that helps employees recognize what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then get them kind of committed to, uh, you know, buying in and making those changes. Situational leadership is the idea that the best leaders, most effective leaders, are the ones who are able to match their leadership to whatever the situation is. So when I think about this in coaching, I think one of the big mistakes coaches sometimes make is they coach the team they wish they had rather than the team that they do have. And so as a coach, you need to kind of be able to match your team, your group, wherever they might be. So for example, if you just finished having a very senior oriented team and now you have a very young freshman team, those are two very different groups, and they have different needs and different expectations. And so how you coach them has to be different. And that's this idea of really situational leadership. So you have to be very flexible. You need to be able to walk into a situation, assess it, and then decide what it is that you need to provide to give the leadership that that particular group needs to have. So they talk about the two different dimensions, and they're relating it back to what we had just talked about. So when you look at task behavior, that deals with the concern for production. When you look at relationship behavior, that's the concern for people. And so given any particular year or what is happening or what's going on or what group of employees you have, you need to decide and weigh how much of those things you need to spend your time focusing on. So again, if you have a whole new group of people underneath you as a manager, you maybe need to spend more time on building the relationship aspect of things and then focus on task later. So it just depends, but you need to be able to kind of assess those things. Other leadership qualities, character is really important. If you don't have integrity, if you don't have, if people don't respect you as an individual or a person, it's going to be tough to demonstrate any kind of leadership. And the other aspect is, again, emotional intelligence. Being able to monitor your own emotional state as well as your employees' emotional state, or the people that you're working with emotional state. You need to be in tune to those things, so that way you can, again, adjust and adapt based on what it is that you're seeing, so that you can effectively work with those groups of people. When you look at the employee's role in terms of teamwork, um, valued employees are the ones who are willing to step up and be leaders in all kinds of different situations. Each team member should really be able to view themselves as being an integral part and being a leader in their own particular way. And so when we look at high performing teams versus low performing teams, this figure 12.5 is going to kind of go through the characteristics of what teams on their way up are doing, high performance teams, and those teams that are on their way down, low performance teams. And what are going on and what's happening in those situations, and how do people and team members react when different things are going on. And so hopefully by looking through this, you can kind of think about times when maybe those things were happening. The other thing is you need to realize that leadership takes all kinds of different forms and that we can each be leaders in our own particular way. And again, if you kind of think back through your life or think back through your group of friends, you recognize where they show and demonstrate leadership. And it doesn't come in any one shape or size or style. And everyone can contribute and be a leader in different ways. So this right here goes through a couple of different ones that you can kind of see in a workplace. Being a valued team member, don't become a member of a group that's outside of everyone else, because then you're not going to build that team leadership. Don't do things that are going to disrupt and cause a group to become dysfunctional. Be open and honest and communicate. Don't sit back and not contribute. You are part of a team and you need to contribute to that team. And so you need to speak up and take part and be an active member. Patrick Lencioni goes through these 5 dysfunctions of a team. And again, I think that's one of the things that you're required to do is to think back to a group that you belong to and which of these maybe 5 dysfunctions existed that made that group not work the way that it should have worked, that team not be as successful as maybe it could have or should have been. So these are things that can really get in the way and sabotage. Ultimately, when you look at managing your relationship with a boss, this is a mutual relationship, or at least should be a mutual relationship. So you have to take ownership of your own role to play here. You need to be able to assess your own strengths and weaknesses and seek out the resources that you need to turn weaknesses into strengths. And then also, how do you take those strengths and maximize them so that not only can you be successful, but so that you feel like you're important, you're valued, you're needed, and you're necessary. Work to understand your boss, observe them and find out what is it that maybe their personality is like. What is their leadership style like? What is their communication style like? What do they need from you? And then you can match and again flex your style to theirs. Also, be very frank and candid and open. Don't be afraid. And one of the other things, Mika Brzezinski has this book that's Know Your Value. And especially for females in the workforce, you need to know what it is that you're contributing. Know your value and don't be afraid to talk about that, what it is that you are contributing, what it is that you are doing. And you don't have to be bragging about it, or you don't have to be snippy about it. Really be open and honest and straightforward. And those are the things that you need to do to not just for your own well-being, but to demonstrate your worth, your value, and the strengths that you are bringing to the company.